Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. The following is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This is the verbatim federal courtroom testimony of the Sean Diddy Combs trial as reported by Inner City Press. When Chewy Thompson, the grandson of Elvis Presley, walked into the courtroom, no one expected what was about to unfold, but what he revealed would shock even the most hardened reporters. Under oath, Chewy claimed that his grandfather, the great Elvis Presley, had once been trapped in a horrifying underground world, a world controlled by none other than Diddy's father, Melvin Combs. He said Elvis knew him personally, and what he witnessed at those infamous freak-off parties wasn't just disturbing, it was soul-crushing. Chewy brought evidence, including a never-before-seen video of Elvis at one of Melvin's parties, visibly terrified and out of place. Then, Chewy told the court that he too was invited to a modern-day Diddy party, where he saw something so disturbing he confronted Diddy and knocked him out cold. As Diddy sat silently listening, the look on his face told the world everything they needed to know. The truth was out, and his empire was collapsing. The courtroom was silent as Chewy Thompson adjusted the microphone in front of him. He wasn't a singer, wasn't a politician, wasn't a media figure trained to give sterile answers. He was a grandson, a witness, a young man bearing the weight of a legacy and a secret. What he was about to share didn't just shake the case. It shattered generations of silence. "My name is Chewy Thompson," he began, "and I'm the grandson of Elvis Aaron Presley. I'm here because my grandfather didn't die of addiction. He died of exposure to something he was never supposed to see." He didn't need to convince the jury. The gravity in his voice said enough. Chewy began by explaining something few knew, that in the early 1970s, Elvis Presley met a man by the name of Melvin Combs, father of Sean Diddy Combs. Melvin, he said, wasn't just a figure on the edges of the entertainment world, he was part of the underbelly, a man who moved quietly through music, politics, and organized crime. He wasn't the guy in the photos, Chewy said. He was the guy behind the curtains. According to Chewy, Melvin and Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's infamous manager, had more than a passing connection. They shared mutual contacts, favors, secrets. Melvin was a broker of shadows, Chewy testified. He made things disappear, people, scandals, even entire nights. And somehow, Elvis got caught in it. Chewy revealed that his grandfather had once confided in his grandmother, Priscilla, about a string of exclusive parties in Los Angeles and Miami that he had been pressured to attend. He said they weren't parties. They were something else, something cold, something dark. Elvis, at the time, was on the verge of a spiritual crisis. According to Chewy, he'd told his family he felt ensnared in a world where power was bought with flesh, silence, and blackmail. He met Melvin through music, but he stayed in Melvin's world out of fear. By the time Elvis realized how deep he was, Chewy said he was too famous to leave and too scared to speak. As Chewy continued, the courtroom watched Diddy, seated at the defense table, start to tense. This wasn't about his actions. This was about his legacy. And suddenly, the sins of the father were front and center. Chewy described Melvin Combs not as a military hero, but as an operator, a man who played both sides between CIA liaisons and organized criminal networks embedded in the music industry. Melvin knew how to control artists, Chewy said. He wasn't interested in fame. He was interested in leverage. Using documents obtained through a private investigator and family records long kept sealed, Chewy outlined a disturbing pattern of behavior. He described Melvin's ownership stake in multiple shell properties in California and Florida, places linked to gatherings known internally as Red Doors. These were early versions of what would later be coined freak-offs, and in attendance at one of them, according to Chewy, was a reluctant and frightened Elvis Presley. Elvis wasn't a guest, Chewy explained. He was an asset, a trophy. His presence legitimized these parties for other nervous stars, but behind closed doors, he hated every second of it. Chewy said that Elvis wrote letters begging to be removed from the scene, many addressed to his manager. He called it a hell with chandeliers. He said Melvin had a smile that never reached his eyes. In one passage from a recovered journal, Chewy read aloud, "I saw a child walk into the room and a man close the door. I couldn't move. I wanted to scream. Melvin just stood there, watching, grinning." The courtroom was visibly shaken. Melvin created this world, Chewy concluded. Diddy just inherited it. He made it bigger, louder, and even more dangerous. As Chewy flipped through a worn leather-bound journal, one of Elvis's last, he read the entries slowly, methodically. The jury stared in disbelief. "If I leave, they ruin me. If I stay, they own me." Melvin said the camera's always on, even when you can't see it. "I saw things I can't sing about, and I don't think God will forgive me for staying silent." These weren't lyrics. These were cries for help. Chewy explained how his grandfather became a pawn in Melvin's twisted game. Elvis was manipulated into attending event after event, each more disturbing than the last. These weren't Hollywood parties. They were pressure cookers, designed to see what and who would break. According to Chewy, Elvis was placed into compromising situations on purpose. They fed him pills, liquor, then they watched and filmed. He testified that he found documentation from a hidden vault in Graceland containing letters and torn film reels labeled with names. Some of those names are still stars today. Others vanished. And then came the video. Chewy paused, then handed a USB drive to the prosecution. The lights dimmed. The courtroom monitors flickered. Grainy footage appeared. Time-stamped July 1974. A lavish mansion. Guests in masks. Bodies moving rhythmically under candlelight. Then, a close-up. Elvis Presley, slouched in an armchair, face pale, expression hollow. Sitting next to him was Melvin Combs. He wasn't singing. He wasn't laughing. He was trapped. The video showed enough to make the jury uncomfortable. Faint moaning, movement, a whisper of a child's voice. Then static. Chewy faced the judge. "That's why I'm here," he said. "That's the real reason my grandfather died. Not because of a heart attack, but because his heart broke from what they made him be part of. What do you think that black helicopter outside Graceland the night he died was? Now you know." He turned to Diddy. "And you knew, because he told you. And instead of ending it, you brought it back." The air in the courtroom grew thick as the lights dimmed. All eyes turned to the screen as the prosecution played the footage Chewy had submitted. A black and white reel that looked like it had survived fire and time. The timestamp read July 19th, 1974. And in the bottom corner, in faded ink, the name of the estate. The White House, Bel Air, California. But this wasn't political. It opened with candlelight, not romantic, but ritualistic. Figures moved through a marble hall dressed in masquerade masks. In the background, soft music echoed. Not Elvis music. Something darker, ambient, chilling. The camera panned to a gathering in what appeared to be a ballroom. Dozens of men and women. Some seated, some standing. Others leading barely dressed individuals into back rooms behind curtains. Then the frame locked in. Elvis Presley, unmistakably him, sat in the corner, slouched in a gold-framed chair, wearing a suit, but visibly uncomfortable, sweat on his brow, eyes scanning the room like a caged animal. Beside him sat Melvin Combs, laughing, holding a cigar. At one point, he leaned in and whispered something into Elvis's ear. Elvis flinched. "I want everyone to understand," Chewy said as the screen froze on his grandfather's face. "That man sitting there is broken. You're not looking at the King of Rock. You're looking at a prisoner." Chewy explained that the footage had been hidden in a sealed Graceland storage room for decades, misfiled among old fan reels. He never told anyone he had it, but he couldn't destroy it either, because he wanted us to know the truth someday. The video then cut, mid-movement, to another brief scene. A hallway, dark. A young girl walking past the camera with her head down. A voice off camera, unmistakably Melvin's, calling her name. Then silence. Gasps erupted in the courtroom. One juror covered her mouth, another looked away. Diddy, seated at the defense table, visibly tensed. For the first time, he looked genuinely rattled. He leaned to his attorney and whispered furiously. Chewy turned toward him and said into the microphone, without emotion, "You recognize the furniture, don't you?" The courtroom went completely still. "That's because you still host parties in that same house." Chewy shifted the focus from the footage to the aftermath. What happened to Elvis after that 1974 party, and the others that followed, wasn't just physical, it was spiritual collapse. The man who once sang about love, about heartbreak, about rebellion, he stopped singing. On the inside, he was already dead. According to Chewy, Elvis tried to break away from the inner circle after a particularly disturbing event in 1976. A party in Palm Springs that allegedly involved multiple underage individuals and high-profile guests. He came home that night and told Priscilla, "I've seen the devil in silk sheets, and he knows my name." Chewy revealed entries from Elvis's final personal journal, pages never seen by the public. In one, dated just 3 weeks before his death, Elvis wrote, "They offered me silence in exchange for peace. But peace isn't peace when you've seen what I've seen. They have footage. They have files. They own the people who write the news. I can't fight them, but maybe one day my blood will." Chewy said Elvis began withdrawing from everyone, relying more heavily on drugs not out of addiction, but desperation. He was trying to forget, not party. Chewy testified that the same people who promised him security, powerful execs, government friends, and entertainment moguls, had turned into his prison guards. He couldn't go public. Every major tabloid back then had ties to the machine. If he spoke, they'd spin it, or bury it. Then Chewy dropped a chilling detail. The week before he died, Elvis had a heart-to-heart with a family member. He said, "If anything happens to me, don't believe the headlines, and don't trust anyone in a tailored suit." On August 16, 1977, Elvis was found dead. The cause was ruled a heart attack induced by drug use. But Chewy suggested the story was far more sinister. He wasn't killed with a weapon. He was killed with fear, with silence, and with the weight of secrets too heavy to carry. He paused. They didn't just kill a man. They killed a witness. Decades later, Chewy thought his family's nightmare had died with Elvis, until 2022, when he received a DM from a well-known music producer inviting him to an exclusive event in Los Angeles. He realized later it was the same property. He was handed a drink he never asked for. Escorts whispered to him about the gold room upstairs. And then he saw him, Diddy, holding court in the center of the party like royalty. His eyes scanned the room like he owned every soul in it. What happened next shocked the courtroom. Chewy testified that he saw Diddy aggressively grab a young man, someone who looked barely legal, by the arm and pull him toward the hallway. The boy looked terrified. It wasn't a handshake. It wasn't mentorship. It was control. Chewy stepped in, told Diddy to back off. Diddy allegedly turned and said, "You don't know what you're stepping into." And I told him, You're stepping into the same hell my grandfather did, and I'm not going to let you do it again." The room fell silent. Chewy said Diddy got in his face, and Chewy hit him. One shot, he dropped. People screamed. His security didn't touch me. They just looked scared. He walked out. No charges were filed, but the message was sent. "I wasn't Elvis," Chewy told the courtroom. "I wasn't going to die with the secret." He turned to Diddy, who now looked visibly shaken. "You should have known that blood remembers, and mine never forgot." After the altercation at Diddy's mansion, Chewy thought it was over. He thought walking away from that party meant he was safe. But the machine that protected Diddy, the same machine that once destroyed his grandfather, was still alive and still hungry. The next day, Chewy testified, "I woke up to 5 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Then came the DMs, messages that just said, 'You messed up,' and 'You should have kept your mouth shut.' At first, he laughed them off, but within 72 hours, things escalated. His car was vandalized. A family member received a fake call pretending to be from the hospital, claiming Chewy had been in a fatal accident. It was psychological warfare. "They weren't trying to kill me," Chewy said. "They were trying to make me kill myself." Just like they did to his grandfather. Chewy told the court he started connecting the dots. The property he had been invited to wasn't just owned by a holding company, it was still in Diddy's trust. The woman who had taken his phone at the door? An assistant connected to Diddy's event production team. The party wasn't spontaneous. It was a ritual, Chewy said, a continuation of something older, sicker. But what broke him wasn't the threats. It was the discovery of a voicemail. One evening, while combing through old archives in Graceland, he stumbled upon an unlabeled cassette. On it was Elvis Presley's voice, low and broken. "If something happens to me, don't let them rewrite it. Don't let them say it was pills or weakness. They wore me down. They cornered me with cameras, with secrets. And Melvin," he said one day, "his boy would take the throne, and I'd be a footnote." That voicemail shattered Chewy's heart, but it also cemented his mission. "They killed his legacy with lies, but they won't do it to me." So he called his lawyers. He reached out to prosecutors. And when they offered him the chance to testify, he said yes. Not as a celebrity, not as a victim, but as a witness to a system that has operated unchecked for decades. As Chewy wrapped up the timeline of horrors, the judge allowed him one final statement before cross-examination. What he did next wasn't just testimony. It was history. He reached into his bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. Inside was a typed transcript from a private investigator. The document detailed witness accounts, unreleased footage logs, and internal texts between Diddy's team, discussing how to contain the Chewy situation. He read one line out loud. "If this kid connects Elvis to the original freak-off blueprint, we're all Ed. He needs to be silenced, discredited, ruined." The courtroom gasped. One juror audibly said, "Oh my God." Chewy then turned to Diddy and said, "You didn't just inherit your father's fortune. You inherited his evil." Then he dropped the biggest bombshell yet. In the Graceland archives, we found a sealed envelope from 1975. It was addressed to the FBI. It contained a list of names. People Elvis claimed attended Melvin Combs' freak-off parties. One of the names on that list is Clive Davis. Another, Quincy Jones. Another, Russell Simmons. And at the bottom, scrawled in pen, Melvin said one day his son would run the entire empire. Chewy handed the letter to the court. Verified handwriting, postmarked, never mailed. He then told the judge he had one final piece of evidence: a photograph. On the screen flashed a black-and-white image of young Diddy, around 9 years old, standing in the same Bel Air mansion hallway from the 1974 video. He wasn't just continuing the legacy, he was raised in it. The gallery was in chaos. Reporters ran from the room. Diddy's attorneys begged the judge to strike it from the record. But it was too late. The public had seen it. The jury had seen it. And Diddy, once the untouchable mogul, was now the face of a dynasty soaked in generational exploitation. As Chewy stepped down from the witness stand, the courtroom was frozen in time. Diddy sat motionless, his jaw clenched, hands shaking, eyes fixed on the floor. For the first time, the mask cracked. Not with rage, not with arrogance, but with a quiet, soul-deep knowing that this was the end. Chewy stood just a few feet away, and in front of the jury, the press, and a global live stream audience, he addressed him one final time. "You once said no party is like a Diddy party, but I've seen your parties. I've seen what happens when the music stops and the doors close. My grandfather saw it too, and it killed him." He paused. "You made the industry your playground. But every playground has a reckoning. Every king has a fall. And every secret eventually screams for light." The courtroom fell into a silence so thick it felt like pressure in the chest. And then Chewy said, "You didn't just lose your empire today. You lost your silence. Forever." The judge nodded. This testimony will remain part of the public record. As Chewy turned to leave the courtroom, Diddy finally looked up. Their eyes locked. For a moment, nothing was said, but everything was understood. Chewy gave him one final look. Not angry, not triumphant. Just the look of a man who carried the pain of a bloodline. And finally, after generations of silence, let it roar. He walked out into a swarm of reporters, microphones, and flashing cameras. But Chewy didn't stop. He just whispered to himself, "Rest easy, Granddad. We said what needed to be said." And behind him, inside the courtroom, Diddy sat, frozen. A ghost in a suit. Surrounded by lawyers, but utterly alone. Because, for the first time in his life, the truth was louder than him. As Chewy stepped through the courtroom doors and into the sunlight, the noise of the outside world came crashing in. Camera shutters clicking like gunfire, news anchors shouting for statements, and protesters holding signs that read, "Protect the truth," and "Justice for Elvis." But Chewy didn't say a word. He kept walking, straight ahead, like a man with nothing left to prove. Reporters scrambled for footage. Some questioned if the moment would change the industry. Others wondered how deep the rot really went. But inside the courthouse, Diddy remained still. His lawyers whispered, strategized, spun, but none of it mattered. Because no PR team could erase the image that had just burned itself into America's collective conscience. The grandson of Elvis Presley standing in court and accusing one of hip-hop's most powerful men of carrying forward a legacy of evil. Back at Graceland, Chewy's family waited. He had told them everything in advance, showed them the tapes, the letters, the voicemails. But it wasn't until he walked through that front door that they understood what he had done. He didn't just defend Elvis's name, he freed it. From decades of rumors, from watered-down documentaries, from lies. Later that night, Chewy stood alone in Elvis's old music room. He placed a hand on the baby grand, the same one his grandfather had played during sleepless nights. Then he lit a candle. One flame. For closure. He whispered, "They didn't erase you, Granddad. They just hit pause. And today, I pressed play." Behind him, a photo of Elvis smiled on, no longer a ghost, but a legend finally heard.